vehicles outside the White House right now. Right now, in fact, there's the possibility that President Trump may speak shortly. But we know this morning he was telling governors they've been weak, they need to dominate. We've seen protesters and even journalists pepper sprayed and arrested. We have curfews in big cities, small cities. I know it's just your take. It doesn't represent everybody, but you have a very well-informed take. So what do you think this is an expression of?
I mean, I think we can't separate this from the pandemic, from COVID-19. I know you said that normally that's what you talk about on this show, but I feel like that's why this is happening right now. You know, I think people are feeling more scared. This in the COVID-19 era, they're feeling more afraid. They're feeling more hopeless. They don't have money. They can't pay rent. They can't get access to health care. The Black and brown community are seeing people die at a higher rate and affected by COVID-19 at a higher rate. And there's no sense that the government is coming to help us in any substantial way. If the government had just put money in people's pockets and said, hey, we're going to make you whole until we get through this so you can stay at home and actually pay your rent so you're not on the front lines, you're not desperate, I think this looks very differently right now. There may be protests, but I don't know if they erupt around the world as they're erupting around the world right now.
Yeah, and it is around the world. But you mentioned the economics, right? If people had money, means to support their family. So is that what's adding to it? Because, you know, it's not just about the police brutality or the death of George Floyd or, you know, Oscar Grant, Eric Gardner, any of those, Trayvon Martin, all that adding up. Is it about the fear that I'm going to go out there as a Black person and not come home alive? Or is it about, you know, I'm just not able to take care of my family? I can't make a living here in America.
I mean, I definitely think that every time a video comes out that shows a Black person being abused, killed by the police, it feels like, okay, this has to stop. So I think that happens. But again, people, as I wrote on Twitter, it's hard to start a riot when everybody's got a good job, has access to health care, has access to education, and feels like they're well represented by their politicians and well protected by their police force. Mm-hmm. So if all those things are happening, it's hard for outside agitators to get you to be with them while they throw a brick through a Target window. But because people feel, especially Black folks, feel completely abandoned by the government on a good day, but this is an especially bad day, people have more time and more pent-up frustration to get out in the streets.
Mm-hmm. Okay, so given that then, what do you think the solution is? What do you think our leaders need to start doing?
You know, I mean, when I heard about Trump calling the governors weak, I sort of thought, what is your response as a governor if the president calls you weak when you know you're doing the best you can for your people and you've had very little support from Trump and the federal government? I feel like the politicians at the top, like, what is the senator's response? What is the Congress people's response? They have to do a better job of confronting him and working hard to figure out how to get around him so that they can actually promote justice and equity. And right now it feels like there's a stalemate up there. Mm-hmm. You know, as much as I like to hear Nancy Pelosi make fun of him, it feels like ultimately what is that doing? And so I'd say the other thing is that those of us who are living in these cities, we have to trust organizers and the elected officials that we can mm-hmm. to do the job, but we have to put pressure on them.
So Dr. Martin Luther King had said, riot is the language of the unheard. Is that the message that's been unheard that Black America has been trying to send forever? Is that, you know, we need to be able to not worry about our safety when we're out there, and also we need a way to make sure we are enjoying the economic pie like everybody else?
I think, again, if you have a place to live that you feel is good and safe and affordable, if you feel like your neighborhood is looking out for you and your community, and the political leaders in your community support you and hear you, yeah, it is way harder to think about going out into the streets.
Okay. All right. And right now, clearly, the fact that so many are out in the streets, we get the message. Hey, you're a comedian, so you don't offend easily, which is a good thing, because I'm about to ask some questions that will have some people saying on Twitter, if you got to ask, then sit down. But, you know, I really disagree with that, because I think unless you ask, how do you begin to understand why things look so different from somebody else's perspective, right? And I know you yourself have joked about having to explain the impact of racism to white people. That's, you know, you've said that. So explain why everybody else should care what's happening in Black America.
Pastor Michael McBride, who's the pastor at the Way Church in Berkeley, California, says white people have to understand that the racism that affects Black people and brown people and people of color ultimately affects them too. Because the society that's not just and equitable for everybody means that you're not getting the most out of the members of your society, and the society's not as good as you want it to be. So if your society is not educating all the kids, then all the kids don't have a chance to engage fully in the future and make the future a better day. So for me, the idea is that white folks have to stop thinking about, oh, I should go out in the streets to help the black people. They should go out in the streets selfishly, because if the America is better for black folks, it's better for me, because this is truly the rising tide that lifts all boats.
So what do you hope is the takeaway, not just for white America, but also, whether you're Latino, Asian, here in the Bay Area, I tend to think, maybe I'm Pollyanna, but I feel like we don't think that way. Like maybe I should think that way, but I don't look at people so much through race in my life, and people will call that naive. I know it. I look at the individual and who they are, but is that also not the best approach if we really want to solve these problems? Like, I have a thick skin, so you can tell me I'm wrong. That's okay.
Okay, good. You're wrong.
Yeah, totally cool.
I know. I'm being flippant a little bit, but okay. I think that even though, yes, I believe you that you judge people by who they are, not by the color of their skin or their gender or their preferred pronoun. I believe you with that. But then I think we all have to go, no matter if that's true or not, COVID-19 is still hitting black folks in East Oakland harder than it's hitting white folks in San Francisco. You know what I'm saying?
Yes,
so we still have to go.
The numbers support that, absolutely.
No matter how I feel as an individual, the system isn't working for everyone. And as a person of privilege, which you and me thankfully are people of privilege, we have to use the responsibility, especially in a historical moment. Because I feel like right now we're living through the moment that historians will write back on and go, these are the people on the right side of history, and these are clearly the people on the wrong side of history. And they don't ever write about the people who are like, they were on the middle side of history. It's always, you get divided up in one group or another. And so right now, I think it's on those of us with privilege to use our voices and our resources and our privilege to help heighten the voices of the people who aren't heard. You know, a riot is the language of the unheard, because enough people aren't listening to the unheard. And if we listened to them and took their concerns seriously, there would not be the opportunity for a riot. Forget the need for a riot. There wouldn't be the opportunity for a riot. We would only have riots when sports teams won.
And we don't like seeing that either, but it happens.
No, we don't like that either, but
the time.
That's a different type of riot. Those don't, if the Warriors win another championship, that riot doesn't spread around the world.
You are right. Okay, let's carry this conversation over to our live stream platforms and take a short break on the air. Over on live streams, I want to talk about a question that people are posting now about looting and what that means for the cause. So join us over there on Facebook Live. Okay. Kamau, Michael has a question. Michael Wyatt. He says, everybody says these small handful of looters and people destroying things, it's taken away from the power and meaning of the protest. What does a handful of murdering racist people do for the police force? That's
like a PhD essay in that question. So, well, as many people have said, Chris Rock has a joke in his last special about that. Some jobs can't have bad apples. We sometimes say there's a few bad apples in the police force, but some jobs can't have a few bad apples. Police is one of those jobs. The medical profession is one of those jobs that they have to be held up to a much higher standard than your barista or, not other jobs that aren't as essential or also don't involve life and death. So I think the fact is that even if the percentages say that most cops aren't participating in the abuse of African Americans, most cops, by virtue of not clearing out those bad apples, are participating in the abuse of African Americans. I think,
It's like that Minneapolis police chief said, you're complicit. He was referring to the other 3 officers who were on video there, that any one of them could have stopped this from happening, right?
Yeah, I mean, we have in Oakland, all of the heat of the Oscar Grant killing went on Johannes Messerly, the one cop, but there were other police officers there. And as we all know, Johannes Messerly served, I think, less than 2 years in prison for murdering Oscar Grant. So even when justice prevails, it doesn't land as harsh on the perpetrator when they're police officers as it does on the victims.
Okay, Alex has a statement. They ain't rioting to be heard. They want freebies, all of them, whites, blacks, browns. Similar to Ray's comment, which is destroying innocent businesses and looting is such an awesome opportunity at justice. Wink, sarcasm, obviously. Maybe, we don't have too much time, so I want to take it back on air and address that issue. All right.
Yeah, I mean, it's
cool.
fine.
We got 10 seconds, I think. Just 12, just enough time to take a sip of water. All right, we are back on air with the executive producer and host of CNN's United Shades of America and Oakland resident W. Kamau Bell. We've been having an interesting conversation over on our Facebook Live platform. Folks were asking about looting in particular, right? And this is done by not just blacks, I mean, everyone. You see people from the Sky 7 shots of all races, but they're saying they ain't rioting to be heard. They want freebies, all of them. And how is that an opportunity for justice? What do you think about that?
I mean, I feel like this, I've answered this question over and over again. I feel like I answered in the last block, but people don't want to hear the answer. There are certainly different segments of people who are out there protesting. There's the initial protesters who go out there for peace, and then there are people who go out there to be opportunists. And you have to also remember that the police, generally when they show up to protest, show up in gear that looks like it's ready for war, which becomes agitating on its own. So I think that like certain amount of property destruction is just, some people just get so frustrated out there, they start breaking things. And then there's people like the people you saw in Walnut Creek who are just like, oh, people are rioting. Now let me go to the Macy's. You know what I mean? So I think we have to stop acting like, you know, in America, we like to paint black people with a broad brush, and then we like to paint protesters with a broad brush.
Right.
Everybody's not out there for the same reason. And as I said before, if you responded to the needs that these people were, that the core of protesters were talking about, police reform and justice when police kill people, they wouldn't be out in the streets. And rioters and looters don't just show up on a Wednesday.
Right.
They show up when there's a chance, when they have the cover of a protest.
And you're right. It's something for each and every one of us to think about, including journalists, that people have different agendas, and you can't look at, you know, one snapshot and expect that everybody's the same. So I want to.
And I would say to that too.
What?
I would say that too in Berkeley when there was protests, Black Lives Matter protests during a few years ago after St. Louis. White people stood in front of the white people trying to break into the Target, or not the Target, the Trader Joe's and the other stores, because they're like, that's not what we're here for.
Yeah. I mean, look, this is the Bay Area. And again, maybe this is the Pollyanna part of me coming out, but I like to think that most of us really want to work towards social justice and an equitable society for all of us, right? People of all shades. I'm Asian, you're black. Okay, so what? And your wife is white. And we want the same things in the end, right? The ability to take care of our families and lead a good life. But I want to ask you, now that I brought up your wife, okay, you know we had to go there. She's got to be part of the conversation. There was an incident.
You just walked in a second ago, so it's fine.
Oh, she was? She can come say hello. Yeah. But the last time we had you on the ABC 7 News, I think we talked about an incident that you and your wife encountered at a Berkeley cafe. It was a pretty well-known cafe. And that is not, you know, it wasn't what George Floyd encountered, but it's the kind of microaggression rooted in the same kind of racism that you experienced. Tell us that story again.
So yes, it was it was my birthday, I think of 2014. Or 2015. I'll always remember it. It was my birthday. And we went to the Elmwood Cafe, which is now called Baker and Commons, but it's still the same place, So we went to the Elmwood Cafe for breakfast. I left, my wife left. My wife returned back for lunch. She asked me to join her there with some friends. I walked up to her. She was sitting outside with her friends. They were all holding babies because they'd all just had babies recently. And I started talking to my wife and her friends, and one of the employees knocked on the window from the inside and said, "Get out of here," or scram. I couldn't hear them, but it was a very clear, like, stop bothering those white ladies. And I stood there for a second, and my wife realized what had happened because she knows how to recognize my face of that's racism. And another employee came out to sort of give me the, you know, as they call it, the bum's rush, to sort of like leave these white women alone. And that's when my wife said, "That's my husband. This is our child. We ate here earlier today." And the employee said, "Oh, we thought he was selling something. It's okay," as if that was going to make everything okay. The reason why we turned it into a bigger incident is because we realized if it's happening to me, it's happening to other black people who don't have the platform I have. But the reason why we were sensitive about how we turned it into a bigger thing is because at the time the nation was still reeling from Ferguson and Michael Brown's murder. So it was a way to sort of go, it shouldn't always be about death and how black people are killed. There's levels of microaggressions and levels of implicit bias that black people deal with every day that most black people can't complain about because they don't have a platform, and also they have too many other things to do. Luckily for me, this is my job.
Right. But that was an example where you felt like you were immediately labeled a threat.
Yes, I was. They looked at me as a, I was a black guy in a hoodie and a beanie, which at the time I said that's how Mark Zuckerberg used to dress all the time until he was.
That's very threatening. I got to tell you, whenever I see that, I go the other way.
Yeah, that's like 40% of the adult men in the Bay Area.
That is correct. It's the uniform.
Beanie and a hoodie. Yeah, and it was a very nice hoodie because it was Oaklandish. I want to be clear about that. So,
yes, Oaklandish, woohoo.
Yes.
But what was the lesson learned there? And now you guys, at the time you guys had a little baby there. That's why she was there with her mommy friends. And what are you teaching your daughters?
I mean, just last night, so we have an 8-year-old, an almost 2-year-old, and a 5.5-year-old. One day, my 9-year-old, I guess, 9-year-old came into my office to ask me about her social studies homework, her distance learning homework. And I had CNN on, and it was showing Minneapolis burning down. And she immediately asked, what was that? So I explained to her what happened. A man named George Floyd was killed by police, and people are upset about it, and they're starting to burn things. And as we've talked about before, police are not always your friend. She's 9, and we've had that conversation before. And then as soon as that ended, I said, okay, let's do your social studies homework. And it was about the Chinese Exclusion Act. So in our house, we have all these conversations, we're having them at the same time. So she's learning about Angel Island and the Chinese Exclusion Act while she's seeing, and the racism of that, while she's seeing racism on television. And my 5-year-old last night asked, after seeing all this CNN footage on the TV, he's like, what is going on? And we sat her down and had to really break it down to really low levels of what if some kids at your school, what if white kids at your school were allowed to go to the playground and have ice cream, and black kids weren't allowed to play on the playground equipment and they couldn't have ice cream? Obviously, that's a 5-year-old level, but it was just a way to talk about inequity.
Wow. That's interesting because I've talked to educators, too, who say, maybe don't bring this up to children, that they couldn't comprehend it. But what you just said, that makes total sense. I mean, what if you didn't get ice cream?
I feel like that's negligence if you don't bring it up to your kids. And it's also the problem that a lot of white people, they can choose not to bring it up to their kids because for the most part, whenever their kids deal with the police, it doesn't affect them.
Yeah.
And to me, that's why white people have to understand that this affects you, because one day your kids are going to meet my kids and my kids are going to share a story of racism with them. Yeah. And I want your kids to be sensitive.
They might even get married. So there you go.
They might even get, and if your kid doesn't understand racism, he doesn't want me for a father-in-law or your daughter. They don't want me for a father-in-law.
All right, we're going to take a break on the air, but let's continue our conversation with Kamau over on our live stream platforms. Kamau, so I have a question for you. I was thinking a lot, like this past weekend, I was really emotional as well, just looking at all that was happening. And there were a lot of prominent Asian Americans that were taking a stand and not just using the hashtag Asians for Black Lives, but, really trying to start a movement of unity together and doing things together to support each other. And I was like, as an Asian person, I was thinking, would it be taking away from the pain that Black America is so clearly feeling right now if I brought up, gosh, just a few months ago, we were experiencing a lot of anti-Asian racism, people telling you to go back to China or calling you a virus. I recognize that is not the same. I'd rather have somebody tell me to go to China rather than put a knee in my neck. But I wonder if we could somehow use these collective experiences together in a way that strengthens the demand for change.
Then from is a huge swath of the planet and countries that don't all get along with each other. So first of all, there's a conversation that Asian Americans have to have about how do we get on one accord. If you're South Asian, Southeast Asian, Chinese, Japanese, Korean, how do we get on one accord? And I think that's a conversation that the Asian American community has to have more around issues of racism. And then there's the conversation around how do we show up for Black folks? Because Black folks are happy to see you there. And I think what a lot of Black people are upset about is there's not enough Yuri Kuchiyamas in the world. Yuri Kuchiyama, who was friends with Malcolm X and helped his perspective and was on the front lines of the civil rights movement. And I think the Black folks are like, we don't see enough Asian Americans out there when these things happen to us. Mm-hmm. And so that's the thing I think Black people want to see. And I think Asian Americans are really taking that charge and showing up for it, hopefully, or starting to show up for it.
Yeah. All right, cool. We're going back on air.
Coming back on air in 3, 2, back.
And we are back with executive producer and host of CNN's United Shades of America and Oakland resident W. Kamau Bell. Kamau, here's a question from Marilyn Rose, actually for both of us, but I'm going to start with you. What are you doing to take care of your mental health during this time? You make jokes.
Yeah, and avoiding this idea. I'm turtling up. I sent this out on Twitter earlier today about, like, I was responding to a friend of mine, Ijoma Oluwo, about my wife has to remind me to go outside. My wife has to remind me to eat, because otherwise I'll stay in my office on my computer like this. And so right before we did this, I just took a nature walk with my 5-year-old because she had it for an assignment from her science class. And that to me was like a big, like, whew, where we just sort of went and looked at animals, and we ran across a couple deer and, took pictures of flowers for her homework. But it was just as much my homework as it was her homework. So I'm not doing that enough. Also, it's a great time to watch dumb YouTube videos. It's a great time to watch clueless reality shows. Like, it's a great time to really, that's actually self-care as far as I'm concerned. Thank you, Disney Corporation, for The Last Dance. I appreciated that as my self-care.
On behalf of our parent company, you're welcome.
Yes. I want to, as a Warner person, I have to be honest that was very helpful to me.
Yeah. Okay, so in answering that question, for me, I've been eating a lot of sourdough that my husband's been baking, so that's been helpful to me. But I guess also going on walks and really diving into the work, because I feel as though we are making a difference by just talking about these things, right? I tell you that I'm going to say a lot of wrong things, and you go, yeah, I'm not offended, and vice versa, right? You calling me by the name of another Asian American broadcaster, and I'm not offended. I'm like, I love her. Let's go. Let's do this.
I'm glad we got to that. I mistook her for a different person who works at ABC News, who was, of course, Asian American, and I'm owning it right here because this is how it works.
It is how it works.
I have goose pimples right now as we talk about it, because I know people on Facebook are going to be like, and yet this is how it works. Own your mistakes, step into the mistake, step through the mistake.
That's because we know each other's intentions are totally pure and innocent, that we don't harbor hate or look at people through a certain lens just because we said that. So you got to look at the whole, and I think that's an important lesson to us all right now, because I feel like it's really easy for people to grab onto one thing and label someone and then dismiss everything else they might be saying, which might be very relevant and useful. Do you feel that way?
Yeah, I think a lot of this is social media. People take one social media post as your complete thoughts on the subject and then criticize it with you'll post one thing and then somebody will respond with 20, and it's like, well, no, I didn't. I was just saying one thing. And so I think we use social media as a way to vent anger that we don't feel free to vent in our real lives. So I think it's a lot of times it's really just sort of like pretend target practice. And I think that we have to, and also I think those of us, when we do make mistakes like I just did before this, have to be quick to say oops, because the quicker you say oops, or the quicker you own up to your mistake, the faster you can get to the healing. I think one of the big problems in Minneapolis, but also around the country, is that the police departments, and it's way bigger than oops, I want to be clear, but they don't own up to the mistake, sometimes ever, but certainly when they do, it takes days, and that's time where anger is fomenting and building.
But see, that's where I think maybe we are seeing something change for real this time, because you saw several police chiefs come right out, not just the Minneapolis one, but other agencies who are usually hesitant to kind of take that step to criticize, someone else in blue, but to say that is not what we do, that is wrong, and that shouldn't have happened. You've seen that, and that could be real change.
Yeah, I just think, what does it look like in 6 months? What does it look like in a year? I think a lot of times you see a lot of talk around these times, but what is the institutional and structural change that comes out of it is the big question. Sometimes it's like, that would have helped in the 90s, but we're not in the 90s anymore.
We are not in the 90s, yet in some ways, it feels like from 1968, the year before I was born, so I didn't bear witness to what happened then, to now, a lot has changed, yet a lot has not changed.
Yeah, I always say this, Martin Luther King Jr. would be like, I think 91, 92, he could still be alive. And so as much as we want to freeze him in the past, what do you think he would think about this moment right now? He would think not much has changed, or not enough has changed. One black president does not equal the scales for the things that are happening right now. So I think, we like to freeze Martin Luther King Jr. And remember, he was assassinated for what he believed. As much as we celebrate him, he was not celebrated to the same extent in his lifetime. His Bernice King, his niece, talks about that she's a big on Twitter. She talks about that a lot.
You know what? So Reverend Amos Brown talked to me earlier today, and he urged everybody to vote in November. But is that it? Is that the panacea, or is there much more to that? We have 20 seconds. You got to answer in 20 seconds.
I got it. We have just over 150 days till voting. You could do something every day to support anti-racist policies and anti-racist behavior, and then you could vote on election day. Don't wait for November.
Gotcha. All right. Kamau Bell, thank you so much for joining us today. Really enjoyed this conversation. You did make me laugh a little.
I mean, it's a little bit's a lot right now if you grade it on a curve.
Oh, there you go. Take care. I'll see you later.
Thank you.
We're going to take a short break on the air, but the conversation continues. Don't go. Don't go. Kamau, stay there on our live streams, including Facebook Live right now. All right, folks, boy, this has been such an interesting and eye-opening conversation for me. This is why I like my job. You know, don't you feel that's why you like your job? Because we're always talking to cool people. So did you see what I did there? I implied I was cool because, you know.
You're cool. You're cool.
Hey, so tell me about what's coming up on United Shades of America.
Well,
Sundays.
I think, yeah, so it'll be out. They're going to announce the date soon. I don't think it's been announced yet, but we will, you know, we have an episode. I believe our first episode is going to be about farms in America and talking about how the supply chain is really messed up and how farmers are really squeezed right now. And that was before COVID-19. So everything we talked about in that episode is even more highlighted with what's going on with COVID-19. We also have an episode about reparations, which is very timely. We have an episode about white supremacy, not just being the Klan. We have episodes about Iranian Americans. We have an episode about public schools. We go to Cleveland for that one. So a lot of the things we did are going to feel sort of ripped from the headlines, but it's just the issues that are always going on in America. And on top of that, because of the nature of the world, we're going to have some additional bonus content and conversations with the people from the episode to sort of see where they're at in the COVID-19 George Floyd America.
Okay. Hey, this is totally different topic, but do you have a favorite restaurant in the Berkeley, Oakland area that you really think we all need to go out and support right now?
Okay. Yes. Shandong, which is a Chinese restaurant that does delivery. You can get it through one of the apps. They have some of the best dumplings and wontons around. So definitely them. The Star and Grand, because I'm from Chicago. I lived in Chicago for a while, so Chicago style pizza is the best pizza. I don't need to hear any retorts. The Star and Grand. Bilotti, which is a great Italian restaurant. My wife's part Italian. An amazing Italian restaurant that also deliver. All these places deliver and are open right now. So I would say support all of those places.
All right, and we're going to put our money where our mouth is and really especially support all the minority businesses so we can lift people up economically in different ways. Thank you so much. See you later.
Thank you.
And we're back. Thanks so much for joining us today on this interactive show, Getting Answers Today with Kamau Bell. We're here every day at 3 o'clock on air and on live stream answering your questions. Take good care until then.